do men want?
Manifests itself in relationships, and you feel it in relationships, and they can be very powerful spiritually. And if that's what you need, that's what you should go for.
And she said, oh, I'm going to go do a sweat lodge this evening. And I begged her to take me along, and that was about 6 years ago.
Welcome to Speaking of Men. This is public access television from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'm your host, Mike Rivás. Today we have another special program. It's the second part of a two-part. In the last program we took a brief look at the history of Speaking of Men and at our coverage of men's rights on the Channel 99 Review. Today we'll see some highlights from the first 5 months of our current program, Speaking of Men. After our Father's Day program this year, we concluded that the phone-in format we were using just wasn't accomplishing what we were hoping for, and that was a meaningful public dialogue on men's issues. And once we had determined that that wasn't working, it was an easy decision for us to return to our original format, and that is what we have currently, is a 30-minute pre-recorded program. In doing this new change, we've changed our name, time slot, theme music, and virtually everything but the idea of providing a forum on men's issues. So for our first show in the series, we invited Lillian Biffle and Mark Taylor of the Albuquerque Rape Crisis Center to talk to us about rape.
The kind of assaults we hear about most are perpetrated by offenders who need to have power or dominate over their victims, find someone who's vulnerable and show dominance over them, or assailants who are angry. And this is a way, have a lack of anger control, and this is a way of showing that. Those are the two most common that we see.
Right, so there's the power rapist and the anger rapist, basically. It says that 85% of women know the person who sexually assaults them, and 15% they actually know the person. But can you give me a little bit maybe Mark, could you give me a little definition of that?
Well, when we say that a sexual assault or rape survivor knows the perpetrator, the degree of relationship goes all the way from a husband, former husband, boyfriend type situation, all the way to perhaps somebody who works at the grocery store, and it may not register in her mind that she knows this person, especially out of the context of the grocery store. But generally speaking, in 85% of the cases, it's the people we know that tend to be the larger pool of threat that people need to be worried about. In our society, we like to think that it's the person who jumps out of a bush, breaks into the house, the person who makes an unsuspecting attack on us. And I think one of the reasons we do that in our society is because this is such a scary and messy issue for us to deal with, that if we can blame it on these kind of boogeymen in the bushes, then we don't have to really take responsibility in the people that we know and being careful about what's happening in our relationships.
So we tend to put it. On our second show, Mark joined us to talk about what concerned men can do to combat the problem of rape. And a commercial comes on and a woman comes out naked, you look at it. I mean, I do. I mean, I just immediately.
I think the thing that men really need to start addressing is why do we find images of women in powerless positions attractive? Why do we like to see children, young children, dressed up in some kind of age-inappropriate sexual type situation? And men really
Well, do you think we like that, or you just think that at a certain point it's conditioning? I mean, do you think that's what we actually are calling for?
I think it's a little.
Or is it manipulation out front?
I think it's a mixture of both, you know, and it's a two-way street. The advertisers definitely have a responsibility that they are shirking, a social responsibility, and we men, I think, need to start speaking up and telling advertisers and telling magazine editors or telling TV stations that we don't approve of this type of thing. And it's pervasive throughout our culture. Right here in Albuquerque, 94 Rock has something called Rasta Records. And one of them, I don't know the name of the particular song, it's kind of a funny, these songs are funny takeoffs. And one of them, the whole song is about incest. And incest is presented as a very funny joke. And it's not funny. And in this community particularly, where it is rampant, I personally feel it's immoral to make jokes about something like that.
Right.
And, I think if male male listeners of that radio station called up and said, "That's not funny, I don't like that," perhaps that would be pulled off the air.
Well, some men believe that discussion of men's issues should be limited to what men have to say, that women shouldn't play a role in our program. Our producer, Mike Kruchowski, feels strongly that more, not less, communication is needed between men and women. We continue to invite both men and women as guests. Linda Smorella and David Coonsley joined us for 2 programs, one on anger between the sexes and another on building healthy relationships. Here's what they had to say.
Well, I think that flexibility is a big issue, and I think that learning to be flexible and recognizing that though we're different, it doesn't mean that one of us is right and one of us is wrong. And that's where I think understanding the difference in communication styles is real helpful. I think that it's important to know that because I'm more interested in process and feelings and not so interested in necessarily stuff and things, as my sister-in-law used to say, that I'm wrong for that or that you're wrong for that if you do it another way. So I think being able to really listen to each other as individuals, as humans, and not say, "Oh my gosh, I don't think that way," or "I don't feel that way," or "I don't talk that way," and then feel wrong about it is a big step.
Where does love fit into all this?
Good question.
Yeah, oh, love!
Well, I think to me love is both a feeling and it's a way of treating each other and it's a way of acting. Let me say a little bit about the feeling. I think that in a loving relationship there's a sense of respect for the other person. I really like who you are. I really love who you are. I don't need to change you. I think that's a big piece of a healthy relationship. Each of us really appreciates who the other person is, and in a sense, when we appreciate someone, there is that sense of loving and just openness. So I think.
For our viewers who don't know it, New Mexico has a vibrant, vital men's movement. One nationally recognized leader in the men's movement is Barry Cooney, former editor of Man Alive magazine. Barry joined us to talk about men's writing and men's gatherings. What kind of articles and features do you carry, or what kind of message? I know you have a letters section that I read occasionally. Give us a general idea what kind of stories and features you might have in there.
Well, what we're attempting to do is to really put together a kind of publication that's going to really express what are on men's minds. And we're looking for a wide range of topics, and we usually get things having to do with parenting, having to do with men's relation to their children, having to do with fathers, poetry, different kinds of views about the way men feel and the kinds of problems that they have as being men.
So there's not a typical message that you could point to. It's generally the things that men are interested in all over America.
Well, I think that that's true. If we look at different journals across the country, we see that there is some regionalism involved. Different parts of the country do reflect different kinds of thinking. And for us here in Man Alive, what we've discovered is as our men's movement in the state grows and gets more widely known, the issues change. So initially, some of the issues might have to do with lots of things that have to do with men's healing, the things they need to work on to heal themselves.
What would be some typical wounds that men might have?
Oh, goodness. A biggie always is men's relationship to their fathers. It seems that that's the one issue in which many men feel a lot of pain. Fathers are either emotionally absent or physically absent. They're abusive. So that is a very, very big topic with men and the wounds that they bear. Many times we've discovered that once we deal with that issue, or once we introduce that issue to other men, that is the beginning point from which a lot of healing takes place for men.
Right. As men and women search for new, non-sexist role models, we both need to learn more about assertive communication. Jim Simms, a local therapist, told us about what he learned by conducting assertiveness training for women and what he believes men can learn from women's experiences.
We're talking about types of behaviors that are learned behaviors. Those behaviors are coping behaviors. And what we're talking about is passive behavior, assertive behavior, and aggressive behavior. Traditionally, the passive behavior has been associated with women, and the aggressive behavior is associated with men. Simply put, passive behavior means, basically, it means that you're okay, I'm not okay.
That's one down. This is passive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Aggressive behavior means I'm okay, you're not. Assertive behavior means I'm okay, you're okay.
Okay.
And what I've been working with, the groups for men, there haven't been any assertive groups for men. I don't think that men see their aggressive behavior as unhealthy. I think that they see aggressive behaviors as kind of a one-up thing, kind of a they're going to win, and that's what they want to do. They see assertiveness as stepping down. They don't see assertiveness as taking care of themselves. A lot of the times, you're also talking about fear. So whether men are going to, to step down to assertive, to step from aggression back down to assertive, there is somewhere in there they've got to be aware of that they may be afraid. I think men have sometimes have a rough time dealing with their own fear.
Right, and a lot of times this fear comes up in relationships with people, and because they don't have the communication skills to deal with it, they kick into it out of their own fear and inability. Let's...
I think it's important for men to know that we need all of the, we need aggressiveness and assertiveness and passive. We need to have those behaviors in our repertoire. There have been a number of bars that I have been in at various times that I needed to be passive just to get out of there alive. I needed to say, yes, sir, I agree totally, and you are right, and you are in charge. Please excuse me, I was wrong, and get out the door. I needed to be passive. I need to have all of those behaviors, and I needed to have the aggressive behavior and the assertive behavior and the passive behavior in my repertoire. I need to be able to do that.
Keep breathing.
Rest, right. That's what it's about. That's what it's about, too.
Yeah. When some people think of men's issues, they think of fathers' rights. This is undeniably an important issue and a prime motivation for many men becoming involved in men's groups. Hartley West, an Albuquerque attorney, has this advice for men, especially fathers facing divorce.
Well, Mike, I think it's important for men to realize that while they're divorcing their spouse, for whatever reason, they're not divorcing their children. And I like to, in my practice, support men to become even more involved with their children than they had been during the marriage. And that's a big fear that men have, I think, going through the process, and one that I see quite often. In the confusion and all the emotions of grief and anger, men feel that they're losing their children, not only their property, their spouse, their pet dog. They feel they're losing their kids too. And I like to direct them in the opposite direction, rather than losing their children, to become more involved with their kids. And that's pretty much the focus of my practice.
I see. One trend in media coverage of the men's movement has been to search out and emphasize the bizarre, making men's issues trivial. In our opinion, Esquire magazine did a great disservice to men in their November 1991 issue. Mike Kruchowski and I devoted one program to commentary on that issue of Esquire. This attempt, Wild Men and Wimps, barely contained and covered the sneer with which they approached the subject. They actually sent someone underground instead of up front into some sort of a men's weekend. They purported to have an interview with Robert Bly when in fact Robert refused to be interviewed, so they made a lot of disparaging generalizations about what he had to say, and rather than asking men what they might feel was happening in the movement, they took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 18 women who were anywhere from complete airheads to serious feminists, and gave them a format.
Whack.
Gave them a whack at discussing what's happening with the men's movement. So you and I decided that we had 30 minutes to kill. We would sit down and talk about the program. So,
well, like I said, I think they missed the mainstream of the men's movement, and despite the article by Charles Gaines on Bly, which his article is at least an attempt to characterize the men's movement, but he does it everything in terms of Robert Bly's writings and the mytho-poetic movement. Well, from the very first page of this special on the men's issues and men's movement, I thought they were way off base. Their choice of photos portrays only the weird in the men's movement, and there certainly are some weird things going on in the men's movement, but there are a lot of other real valid things going on too. For instance, they have a picture of a man hugging a tree, or a man up to his ears in duckweed in a pond. If they wanted to touch on the mainstream of the men's movement, why didn't they show a picture of a man hugging his child?
Many of our crew members are women. Frequently, our programs prompt spirited discussion among ourselves after taping. We decided it was time to hear a feminist view of the men's movement, so we invited Mary Morrell, co-owner of the Full Circle Feminist Bookstore, to join us.
Now, what feminism is not about, which is what's propped up in the media, is that it's about women wanting to replace all the men in power with women in power. At least the feminism I believe in, that's not the point. I think because those people who define power as the most important thing in the universe, when they think about somebody else trying to take it away from them, they get terrified. And so there's a tremendous amount of anger and hostility toward any woman that does not fulfill what's often called the doormat role. And I think most women have experienced the incredible pressure to be quiet. Feminists are not quiet people for the most part, which you may discover today.
That's why we've got you down here today, as a matter of fact.
Men's movement I believe to be a movement of men of good conscience who are trying to separate themselves from the kind of horrifying decisions that have characterized the destruction of the earth and many of its peoples. To say, on the surface I may appear to belong to this group, but I myself am removing myself from it because I cannot in good conscience stay there. Then the problem comes, where do you stand? Where is the platform for a man of good conscience who removes himself from that group? And I see the men's movement primarily as trying to create a platform on which men can stand with comfort and self-respect.
Mary Morrell taped 2 programs with us, concluding with these thoughts on the topic of bringing men and women together.
I think when you have good communication, it has to be between people who perceive each other as equals. When you have an atmosphere of either disrespect or fear, you've got a real problem in communication. There is a difficulty in hearing women's voices for whatever reason. When I am in a group and I hear jokes told about women that are ridiculing, and none of the men in the group object, then I have to say that I think they are not really respectful, or they would stop the jokes. And when I think they don't respect me, then I feel like they don't feel like I'm an equal. You don't tell jokes about your equals. You might kid. I think the truth is, if you look at the average man and the average woman, they know where they approach each other, and they can be trusted to know where to work on that. I know that sounds shocking in an age where everybody is told, oh, you have to go to an expert to do X or Y. I think friendship between men and women is something that if you haven't experienced it, you should, because that is where you don't get into nearly the game playing and garbage that you do when you're in those courtship roles. And I think that's a good place to begin any sort of common dialogue, is take somebody to lunch.
So there are some men and women are capable of having relationships without sex being the goal of them, and you think that they can have fulfilling. Another of our favorite programs, probably the crew's all-time favorite, was our interview with Edward W. Wood, Jr., author of the book On Being Wounded. Here, Ed reads from his book, recounting the day he was wounded during the liberation of France in the Second World War.
Then, oh then, the slam of a sledgehammer hit my flesh and lifted me high, and I whirled up and up and up through a tunnel of green leaves toward the sky, my hands extended as if to grasp those leaves, and the dark brown limbs rushing by me, halting my flight into eternity. My fingers brushed over them, they would not hold. I flew higher into the sky and seemed to merge with the clouds, mixed with their wispy tendrils, not knowing whether to continue this arc toward eternity or fall back to the sweet, sweet earth. With a falling, sliding swoop, I tumbled out of the sky, fell to my knees. I put my fingers to my face. Blood, thick and red and dark, swiftly pumping, covered them. I reached up and touched my head. My helmet was gone. Blood poured from a hole on the left side of my skull. A hard lump protruded from my torn scalp. A piece of shrapnel was embedded in the bone. I looked behind me. My pants were ripped away, my right buttock blown open. Beneath the yellow-white fat, I could see the red raw meat, like the steaks my father once fed me. "Hold still, Wood, hold still," the medic cried, blood from the tip of his wounded nose spraying my face. "Stop wiggling, goddammit. I got to get this morphine in you." The blood from his own wound sprinkled over me like spittle from a dying breeze. When the shelling stopped, they lifted me into an ambulance parked at the side of the road. My journey into the land of the wounded began in that ambulance, and being moved by it from battalion aid station into World War I bunkers, I smelled the sweet, cloying odor of blood, felt it drip on me from the stretcher above where the man, the soldier within it, died. Here at the front, before there were forms and bureaucrats to describe and fasten to me some categories of wound and pain, I touched men who for a moment cared for me with greater compassion than I had ever experienced at any time or place in my life. Gentleness and compassion, so difficult for the American male to express. Emotions always held there but held back, contained by some impenetrable shell, breaking open now and warming me after I was wounded, as if love could only be given within the frame of violence, and one must be expressed in conjunction with the other. This, the language of war and peace, violence and love, hate and compassion, I have sought to understand on my 40-year journey through the land of the wounded. That's where it started, Mike. I was 19 years old that summer. I was a boy.
I really enjoy hearing you read that. I enjoyed your reading at the corner bookstore last evening. The concept of the wounded male is much discussed in men's circles these days as a topic. Do you have any comments on that?
I think that the wounded male comes from the kind of violence that I experienced, the direct, brutal confrontation of combat. But there are also other kinds of wounds that I think are so important for males. One of those, and an essential one, is the relationship between the male as a boy and his mother and his father. Many of the wounds we have as males have to be looked at, remembered from that early childhood, when our fathers often are not there, and we receive so much of our knowledge from our mothers. So there are two kinds of wounds I write about, the wounds of combat and the wounds of family.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. We hope you enjoyed these short excerpts from some of our past shows on Speaking of Men. Watch for us again next week when we return from the past to the present with more programming on men's issues. This is your host, Mike Rivás, telling you to stand if you can, run if you have to, but don't quit. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.